So welcome to Heme Genetics. So I'm going to give you this lecture here on hematopoiesis, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about hemostasis, blood clotting, body fluid balance, those sorts of things. Today is lab medicine. Tomorrow is pathophysiology. And so here we go. Hematopoiesis is the definition, is the development of all blood products. If you're talking about just the red blood cell line, that's erythropoiesis. So this is, we're going to be talking about red cells, white cells, and platelets for the next 12 hours. So it's what it's going to seem like, I think. So if you draw an aliquot of blood, you know what an aliquot is. It's just a measure of blood. In this case, it's 10 liters, 10 cc's. I don't know what that 10 unit is, but if you take blood, draw it out of somebody's arm, and spin it for 5 minutes on in a low centrifuge, then the red cells, which are the heaviest elements in blood, are going to precipitate I guess they precipitate out to the bottom part of the tube. And what's on the top will be the plasma. And what's in the middle will be the white blood cells. More specifically, if you look at this, right here about 43%, that represents the blood cell volume, the normal blood cell volume, and that's called the hematocrit. If you look at the hematocrit in different groups of people, it's slightly different. The hematocrit in men is a little bit higher than that of women, the normal range, in other words. And if you look at somebody that's newborn, that's a brand new baby, their hematocrit is even higher. Up until about 10 years of age, it drops down to about 35%, and then creeps back up after 10 years of age. So it starts high, goes down, and then comes back up to the normal values at about 10 years of age. This thing right here where it says decreased in pregnancy, the hematocrit is normally decreased in pregnancy, the third trimester, because of volume expansion. We have a lot more fluid or plasma, and that makes the hematocrit drop. So anemia of pregnancy is a normal finding. Now, I said right here, this is the red cell mass, and that's the plasma up there. The little white line right there represents the white blood cells, and that's called the buffy coat. And then above the buffy coat is an invisible to the naked eye layer of elements, and those are the platelets. So these are your formed elements in that aliquot. The plasma represents all of the dissolved substances in the blood. So if you take that 57% left over, that liquid volume, 90% of that liquid volume is just pure, plain, flat-out water. 10% of it, though, is made up of dissolved substances. The majority of that is going to be proteins. 7% is going to be proteins, and the majority protein of that 70% is albumin. Okay, albumin is it's about 4 of that 7 will be albumin. 4 of that 7% will be albumin. The rest of it going to be clotting factors like fibrinogen, prothrombin, immunologic factors like immunoglobulin A, B, C, D, E, and so on. Okay? A small percent, 2% of that volume of fluid is going to be made up of non-proteins like amino acids, cholesterol, triglycerides, vitamins, that sort of thing. And then a small percentage, 0.9%, is going to be made up of physiologic saline. Now the physiologic saline, the predominant salt in plasma is sodium and chloride, sodium chloride. There are many other salts, but that's by far the predominant, because that's the major extracellular cation and major extracellular anion. So if you stop and think about it for a minute, physiologic saline is 0.9%. So when you order a bag of IV fluids for somebody and you want it to be physiologic to what your blood is 0.9% saline, okay? And that's also called normal saline, normal saline. Half normal saline would be 0.45%. So that's where you get, when you talk about normal saline, that's where you get 0.9, right there, okay? Now the difference between plasma and serum is that if you take a tube of blood and just let it sit there, don't spin it, just let it sit there, after several minutes, the blood itself will clot spontaneously. And so when it clots, it will settle out, the RBCs, the clotted red blood cells, will settle out. That's also your hematocrit. But because you've allowed it to clot, you've used up all the clotting factors. So serum does not contain clotting factors. Plasma does. And the way to remember that is PA. Plasma all. PA. That's the way I remember it. All right, now, when we're looking at blood smears, and everybody back when you were an undergraduate did a blood smear, probably, a drop of blood from somebody. In medicine, there's the device to measure blood in terms of the counts of red blood cells, white blood cells, and so on, called a Coulter counter. It's a machine. You just put the blood in there. It's all automatic, and a few seconds later, it spits out the values that you're looking for. Coulter counters. Coulter counters. There are actually 15 billion different types of counters. Coulter counter is a brand name. It's like saying Anacin and aspirin. There are tons of aspirins, but Bayer is what you know as aspirin. So anyway, when you say Coulter counter, everybody knows what you're talking about. Now, a Coulter counter is very accurate, more accurate than doing it manually, counting blood cells manually. Until you get above, in terms of white blood cells, until you get above 100,000 cells per milliliter. Now the normal white blood cell count is like 4,000, but in the cases of leukemia, where the blood is just viscous from all of these tumor cells, the Coulter counter starts losing its accuracy. So just keep that in mind. All right? But generally, a Coulter counter, the value you get back from the Coulter counter, you're good to go. Now, if you're going to do a blood smear, you stain it. If you did a blood smear and looked at it in a microscope, all you'd see was a bunch of little circles with no characteristics. They're like little ghost circles. You have to stain them in order to be able to see the different elements. And the two stains you use here are methylene blue, which stains things blue. It is a basic dye, so things that stain blue are basophilic. Basophilic. Basophilia is the appearance of blue. And eosin. Eosin is red. If you look at a bottle of eosin, it is bright red. But when you stain with eosin, the staining will be what's called yellowish pink. That is eosinophilia. So this is an example of yellowish pink right here. Now, if it takes up, and if it does, that cell or the part of the cell is described as eosinophilic. Now, if it doesn't, if it's not eosinophilic and it's not basophilic, but it's somewhere, they say in between, but it's really not. If it doesn't take up either stain appropriately, it's called neutrophilic. And neutrophilia means that it's salmon pink. And this is what salmon pink looks like. Now, if you're red-green colorblind like me, this looks almost the same as that. So I cannot tell an eosinophilic versus a neutrophilic anything in looking at blood smears. So to you, that might be a stark difference, but to a red-green colorblind guy, it really isn't. So does it look starkly different to you? Yeah. I hate all of you.
How many more days?
Pardon me?
How many more days till you leave?
I didn't get one more time.
How many more days till you leave?
I'm not damn soon enough.
Look, he already cut his hair, he's ready.
Huh?
Said you got your hair cut, you ready for the warm weather?
Yeah, I got my hair cut. I just got, my wife, I said, how does it look today? And she sent me this picture. This is off the balcony. I hate her.
Wait, is she sunburned?
No, she's not getting out in the sun very much, but she almost got voted off the island. I'll tell you why. Across the street, there's a cemetery, and the cemetery has grown up. It's like a jungle. And she asked, we wound up meeting the people that owned it, actually the founding families of the island, Fosters. And he said, yeah, you can clean it out. So she hired these two Jamaican dudes to go over there. Actually took a chainsaw down there with her, and they cleaned it out. And I mean, it just like Agent Orange, I mean, just clear cut the cemetery. So the neighbor came running outside screaming, what are you doing? What are you doing? You gotta stop, and all this kind of stuff. And so she's in a big fight with the neighbors now. So I'm probably gonna get voted off the island by the time I get down there. Anyway. So let's start out, we'll talk about erythrocytes. I mentioned to you before, maybe I didn't, maybe it was last year's class. I'll mention it to you again. One of the things that drives erythropoiesis, is a hormone that is synthesized primarily by the kidneys. It's also a circulating prohormone or free hormone that's synthesized by the liver. And this is, you may know about erythropoietin. Have we talked about this before? Erythropoietin. There is erythropoietin that's native released by the kidneys. And there's another protein over here, erythropoietin, that's synthesized by the liver, that's acted on by erythrogenin to convert it to erythropoietin. The end product over here is erythropoietin. Erythropoietin stimulates the marrow to produce red cells. Without erythropoietin, you will be anemic. That's why people with chronic renal failure are universally anemic, because their kidneys are shot and they can't produce erythropoietin. Now there are other examples of where you get erythropoietin developed or synthesized and produced, and it includes here hemorrhage, obviously, not an acute hemorrhage like a gunshot to the gut, but slow hemorrhage, like bleeding from a colon cancer or something like that over a chronic period of time, where you need to replenish blood cells. High altitude also would do it because of the amount of oxygen that and that's why Olympic athletes and everybody else trains at high altitude. That's to build their red cell mass. So when they come down to low altitudes, and you have more hemoglobin for increased oxygen carrying capability. And this is one of the things that they nail these guys on with doping. And erythropoietin is a banned substance, obviously, in sports. And so there you go. So if you have a person in renal failure, or that you need to increase the production of red cells, you can give them injections of erythropoietin. It is a commercially available product, a drug for use. It actually maybe even by mouth, although it's a protein. I wouldn't think it would be. I know there are some Good Shepherd patients on erythropoietin because of their long-standing renal failure. So, all right, let's talk about hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, I love hemoglobin. It's a very complex molecule, really. It's made up of essentially 8 different pieces of parts, or even more than that if you take them down to their base structures. Anyway, your hemoglobin, most of your hemoglobin, 97% of the hemoglobin circulating in your body right now is called hemoglobin A1. hemoglobin A1. And it's made up of, there are two parts to it. Heme is one part, globin is the other. So if you look at just what is globin? Globin is a protein, right? Like immunoglobulin, that sort of thing. Hemoglobin is made up of two alpha chains, two alpha globin chains, and two beta globin chains. It's a tetramer. It's a big molecule. So you have alpha genes and beta genes in your DNA. They code for these proteins. And you guys know the process of transcription and translation, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody's got that down, right? Anybody not have that down? Okay, good. So each of these chains, each of these globin chains, is bound to a porphyrin ring that contains elemental iron. Well, actually, it's not elemental iron. It's a divalent iron molecule. Okay. There are different types of hemoglobin. I said 97% of your hemoglobin was A1, made up of alpha and beta globin. The other 3% are made up of two other types of hemoglobin. And then you also have hemoglobin like sickle cell disease and things like that. Those are made up of different types of globins, different amino acid sequences of the globins. Okay, let's put the heme in there here. You got succinyl-CoA, coenzyme A, two glycine amino acids. They come together to form a pyrrole. You get 4 pyrroles together, and that's going to form protoporphyrin. Iron attaches to the protoporphyrin, and this is the final structure here. So you can look, if you look at the pyrrole there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 4 come together to form protoporphyrin. This inserts into the globin. This is one globin chain. This is one beta chain, or one beta globin. And you can see right there is the porphyrin, right there. So you've got Fe with 2 binding sites. So if you have 4 chains, 2 alphas and 2 betas, you have 4 irons. Each iron can carry 2 oxygen molecules. So you can carry, one hemoglobin molecule can carry 8 elemental oxygen atoms. Now you know oxygen exists as O2, so it's 4 molecules of oxygen. You know, interesting, when you talk about hematology, there are a whole class of diseases that are related to porphyrin metabolism. They're inborn errors of metabolism where people have porphyria.
Vampire disease.
Pardon me?
Porphyria is a vampire disease.
Yes, okay, something about that.
Fun fact, my friend did her senior project over it.
Okay, all right. That's a little weird, but okay. All right. I can't remember what I was talking about. Anyway, if you look at all of these different hemoglobins here, all of these, did you enjoy the thing Friday night?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really cool, actually.
All right.
There was a lot of cake lines.
Good.
Didn't expect that.
If you look at all the the 2 tickets I had, she took. So anyway, if you look at all the different types of hemoglobin, there are tons of them. Over here is hemoglobin S. This is sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is a substitution of one amino acid for another at position 6 on the beta globin gene. You're going to run into that several times throughout the year. It's a substitute, glutamic acid and valine. Those amino acids switch in sickle cell disease at position 6 on the beta globin chain. So if we go to the beta globin chain here, and here's the first amino acid 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That amino acid right there is changed, which changes the whole tertiary structure of the globin gene and doesn't allow it to carry oxygen as well, and also produces a conformational change that in low oxygen tension, this three-dimensional molecule changes, making the cell, which is the red blood cell, which is full of hemoglobin, sickle-shaped. That's how it works. Okay? All right, oh, here you go. Hemoglobin S right there. Now, when you were a little bitty baby and you were born, you did not, your predominant hemoglobin was not hemoglobin A1, but hemoglobin F. 80% of your hemoglobin was hemoglobin F. Hemoglobin F is made up of 2 alpha chains and 2 gamma chains. 2 alphas and 2 gammas. 80% was hemoglobin F. The other 29% was hemoglobin A1. But by about the age of 6 months, your hemoglobin F gene started to be repressed, and hemoglobin A1 gene, in other words, the beta globin gene, started to be transcribed more. So your hemoglobin switched from predominantly F to A1. In sickle cell disease, there's nothing wrong with the gamma globulin. The defect in sickle cell disease is with the beta globulin. So sickle cell disease does not become even apparent until 6 months of age. And that's why. That make sense? Now there's another gene here. It's called the delta gene. That produces, if you have 2 delta globins and 2 alpha globins, that's hemoglobin A2. So in your circulation, you have 97% A1, a couple of percent A2, and you still have about 1% hemoglobin F. One of the things is if you have sickle cell disease, one treatment is to give you a drug called hydroxyurea. What hydroxyurea does is it de-represses the hemoglobin F gene. It turns it back on. So one of the treatments for sickle cell disease is to try to increase your hemoglobin F. That's kind of cool, huh? See, it all makes sense. This clin med stuff is so easy.
But what would that do with their oxygen then?
Oh, nothing. They all 3 can carry oxygen just fine. They're all 3 good. All 3 good. Okay? All right. Let's talk about bone marrow for a minute before we start getting into the erythropoiesis. You have 2 types of marrow. You have red marrow and yellow marrow in the adult. When you started making red blood cells, though, you didn't have any calcified bone. You were like a shark. You just had these cartilaginous templates. So as you were growing, in about the 4th week after conception, the yolk sac you started outgrowing the diffusion capacity of oxygen. So you had to have your own blood cells. You had to have your own circulation. And that didn't take but like 4 weeks after fertilization. It's a real quick process, 4 or 5 weeks at tops. Yolk sac is the place where blood cells started to be made. And then it switches to the viscera, the liver, the spleen. You start making blood cells there. And then when you start getting bone formation, and the clavicle is the first bone to form in embryo, that's where you eventually settle out your blood-making capabilities. And the other 3, the yolk sac went away, and the marrow, the liver and the spleen, they quit doing it, and the whole issue was taken over by the marrow. Okay? There are 2 types, as I mentioned. Yellow marrow is what you have mostly. It's in long bones. It's full of fat. It's fat. So if you were to take a bone, a long bone of an adult, and crack it open, it's just going to be, you remember the anatomy, that fat globular stuff in there. Versus red marrow is called hematogenous marrow. That's where active hematopoiesis is ongoing. And in adults, it's only the flat bones. In children, all of their bones are red marrow. But by the time you're a late teenager, it's just the flat bones, like your skull, your iliac crest, your sternum, and the only non-flat bone is the vertebral bodies. Every other bone in your body is pretty much just yellow marrow. Okay, now, in times of stress, I think it says, can convert. In times of stress, yellow marrow can convert back to red marrow if need be. Okay? This is what they look like. Over here on the left, that's a bone spicule right there. So we're in the marrow cavity. You see all these millions and millions of blood-forming cells of different ages in development. We'll go over all those here in just a second. This is red marrow. This is yellow marrow over here. This is one adipocyte, one fat cell right here. There's another one, there's another. So yellow marrow is just, like I said, it's full of fat. In fractures, and you get emboli from fat emboli, from fractures of long bones. That's why it happens. Okay. Now, erythropoiesis. So, just focusing on red blood cells, you notice that this line goes above the pro-erythroblast here, because that line is going up to some stem cell. There's a stem cell that gives rise, or actually starts to develop, and once it develops to a certain point, you can recognize it as, oh, that's a pro-erythroblast. That's the first recognizable step in red cell formation. The cell stays in that stage here for about a day, and during that day, it can divide. So you wind up with not only a stem cell producing a daughter proerythroblast, you have proerythroblast producing daughter proerythroblast. So you're going to wind up with amplification here of cells really fast. Okay. So you've got this thing dividing in this stage, but it only stays in this stage for about a day until it starts to shrink in size. The nucleus starts to shrink in size too, and you start having the appearance of bluish granules in there. At this point, it's called a basophilic erythroblast. Basophilic erythroblast. A basophilic erythroblast can divide once. And then those two daughter cells will develop over the next 24 hours into what's called a polychromatic erythroblast. Again, the cell keeps getting smaller, the nucleus keeps taking up less and less of the cytoplasmic volume. And when it says polychromatic, or chromatophobic, however you want to describe it, that means that the cell is losing some of its bluish character and taking on a little bit of a reddish character. This thing will divide a bunch of times, but again, stay in this stage for about a day until you get to this stage, which is called a normoblast. A normoblast is more of a reddish cell. You've lost the basophilia, and now it's red. It's reddish. It's about, as it says here, 8 or so microns. A normal red blood cell is 7 microns across. So this one is almost the size of a red blood cell. But what happens is the nucleus becomes pycnotic, P-Y-K-N-O-T-I-C, pycnotic, which means ultra-condensed. If a nucleus is ultra-condensed, the chromosomes you can't have transcription. So it won't divide at this point. In fact, the cell will move the nucleus off to the side, an eccentric nucleus, and then eventually extrude it. So once you have no nucleus, you have no way to divide. Now what's left in the cell will be hemoglobin, which has been synthesizing in greater and greater amounts as you get through these days. The cells becoming more and more red. Here, at the once the nucleus is extruded, you have about 80% of your hemoglobin is manufactured. And there are a few organelles that are left in the cell that continue translating message to produce the final 20% of the globins for hemoglobin. Follow me? You don't need the nucleus. All you need is the mRNA to finish out your 20%. So right here, once the nucleus goes out, pop, it's called a reticulocyte because it's a little red bag with these little blue spots in it. The blue spots are RNA from messenger RNA, and ribosomes. You gotta have ribosomes, right? You gotta have ribosomes. What is a ribosome? What's a ribosome made of? RNA. RNA and DNA are blue. Okay? Remember when I was talking about cancer cells? Blue is bad. Why is blue bad? Because those are all the mitotic figures. Blue is bad. Well, in this, blue is okay here, but not in cancer. All right, so this is the reticulocyte. You have about 1% circulate. If I took 100 cc's of your blood right now and looked at 100 RBCs, 1% of them would be a reticulocyte. Over the next couple of hours to a day, you finally those organelles, because there's no protein synthesis to keep them up, will degrade in the cell, and all you'll be left with is a bag of hemoglobin and a protein scaffold that keeps the cell, the shape of the cell. Okay, that's all that's really in an RBC, a mature RBC. That guy is a biconcave disc. It will live about 120 days. There are more details about it here in another slide. But let me just say this. If you have iron deficiency anemia, or folate deficiency, or vitamin B12, or something like that, and you're anemic, you don't have enough blood cells, right? And I give you that iron, B12, or folate, or whatever it is, to stimulate RBC production, you should expect, if you're correct in your diagnosis, an increase in the reticulocyte count at the end of how long? 1 week. Or 5 days, really. That's why, if you start supplementing them, don't get a blood count tomorrow. It's not going to change. It's going to take 5 days to make a dent. So if you have iron deficiency anemia, which is the most common anemia in people your age, as menstruating females, except for Paul and Ryan and the rest of you guys. So if you have iron deficiency anemia, I'm going to start supplementing you with iron. I'm going to bring you back and I'll give you 2 weeks. And I'm going to get a reticulocyte count and I'll repeat the blood count. If the reticulocyte is still at 1, what's the diagnosis? It's not iron deficiency anemia. You guessed poorly. Okay? All right. Everybody understand that? Everybody follow that logic there? Okay. Good. So here are some little tidbits about RBCs. If they're too big, they're called macrocytes. If they're too little, they're called microcytes. If there's not enough hemoglobin in them, they're hypochromic. If they're really redder than they're supposed to be, it's called hyperchromic. I've never seen that. I'm not even sure that exists, but hypochromic. So if you have iron deficiency anemia, what do you think your cells are going to look like? They're going to be hypochromic because you're not making enough hemoglobin, and because you're not making enough hemoglobin, the cells are going to be small. Hypochromic microcytic anemia is characteristic of iron deficiency anemia, lead poisoning, thalassemia, and anemia of chronic disease. That's one of those 4 things you need to stick in your mind and never forget. Can I say it again?
Yes.
I'm 60 freaking years old and I still could, and that's not even up on a slide, so I'm not cheating. I don't think.
We're aware it's not on the slide.
Microcytic hypochromic anemia is due, the 4 primary things it could be due to are iron deficiency anemia, lead poisoning, anemia of chronic disease, and thalassemia. It's written right there, thalassemia. It's a disorder of the globin chains. I hope I get to talk to you about that because I really like that. Just in case you're on Jeopardy, the alpha gene is located, I think, on chromosome 11. The other 3 genes, beta, delta, and gamma, are located right beside each other on chromosome 16.
Other way around.
Other way around? Okay.
Yeah.
But they're located right beside each other. Okay, the alpha is on one, the other 3 are on another. Okay? Now, in certain chronic diseases, like thalassemia or sickle cell disease, you can have retained DNA fragments. These retained DNA fragments are called Hal-Jolly bodies. And what they look like is if you've got this red RBC, there's a blue dot somewhere in it. That's a Hal-Jolly body. It's a retained nucleic acid, which is blue. It says that there's a chronic disease. I'll tell you which one, but it says that there's a chronic problem. If these things are arranged in a ring like that, they're called Cabot rings. You can Google images what they look like. They're telltale. If you see those on a smear, then you know that there is a problem somewhere. Okay. Here's a summary of erythrocyte maturation. It's pretty easy. All right, platelets. Platelets, the normal platelet volume in your blood is about 150,000 to 400,000 per probably cubic millimeter. Is it cubic millimeter? Milliliter. It's probably a cubic milliliter, not millimeter. There's a lot of them, a whole bunch of them. 150,000 to 400,000, okay? These things, they're also called thrombocytes, as it says here. They're not cells. They didn't start out as cells. They never will be cells. They're flakes off of a cell. And that cell is located in the bone marrow, and only in the bone marrow is called a megakaryocyte. So what happens is if you have the cell, if you have the megakaryocyte, this is a big multinucleated cell, huge cell. If you were to put a red blood cell next to it, it's about like that. I mean, it's huge. So what you have are these little buds off of the membrane here. And as these things bud off of here, they contain substances that we'll talk about extensively over the next 24 hours. Well, already it says it here. Serotonin, which is 5-HT, and thromboplastin. Thromboplastin converts prothrombin to thrombin. Thromboplastin is an enzyme that converts prothrombin to thrombin. Thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. That's how you get a clot. Or one of the steps in getting a clot. Platelets also have these things called glycosaminoglycans, or GAGs, that make them very sticky. And one of the things that is sticky about a platelet is that it binds to a receptor outside of the blood vessel called von Willebrand's factor. Just, you know, von Willebrand factor. If you just abbreviate it, von Willebrand factor. Just leave it at that until tomorrow, okay? That will cause platelets to adhere to things like, if you damage the normal, if this is the normal lining and you damage it and you expose the underlying connective tissues, the connective tissues are loaded with von Willebrand factor and it'll bind to it. That's what I mean by sticky. The normal lifespan of a platelet here is pretty short, a week or so. Well, you replace about 10% of them every day. That's pretty high turnover. And they're taken out of circulation in the spleen. That's where they're taken out of circulation, in the spleen. If you take an aspirin, just a regular bare aspirin, what that does is it interferes with thromboplastin. That's one of the things it does. And if it interferes with thromboplastin, then it will prevent coagulation or eventually fibrin formation, right? So if you've taken an aspirin and I cut and you make a nick on my arm, they will sit there and measure how many seconds it takes for you to stop bleeding. That's called your bleeding time. If you take an aspirin, it prolongs bleeding time significantly. To return bleeding time back to normal, you have to replace 30% of your platelets, because aspirin will bind, takes care of thromboplastin in all of them. You have to have new platelets. And you have to have 30% new platelets for your bleeding time to go back to normal. If you replace 10% of them a day, that's 3 days. So if a person comes in having an MI, they're having a heart attack. In people my age, you should be taking 1 aspirin a day, a baby aspirin a day, right? Why do you take a baby aspirin a day? I just told you, you don't need to take it but every 3 days. Why do you have to take it? Why do you tell people to take an aspirin a day? Not any more than it would if you just took it 1 every 3 days.
Don't forget. They'll remember.
Who the hell is going to remember to take a baby aspirin every 3rd day? Just take 1 a day. It's not going to hurt you. So if I came in, if I'm having a heart attack, I say, Paul, I'm having a heart attack. And one of the questions you're going to ask me is, do you take aspirin? Yes. Did you take 1 today? Yes. What is Paul going to do? He's going to give me another aspirin just to be sure I have an aspirin. If I did, it's not going to help. But if I didn't, then that may be a lifesaver. You know, if you give somebody an aspirin who's having an MI and don't do anything else, you just saved 50% of them. 50% are saved by 1 aspirin. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Yeah, so give them an aspirin. All right, any questions about that?
Like a baby aspirin?
Well, for prophylactic, like every day, it's an 81 milligram baby aspirin. But if you are having an MI, it's 160 to 325 milligrams, which is 2 to 3 or 1 regular strength aspirin. Okay? This is a megakaryocyte right here, big honker. And those are the little platelets that are being formed right there, coming off of it. If you look at a smear, you can see the little platelets that are outside the RBCs scattered around all over the place. Okay? White blood cells. Let's start the white blood cells and we'll take a break. Okay, there are 5 predominant, actually there's 6, but 2 of them look the same. I'll explain. There are 5 general types of white blood cells. 3 of them are called granulocytes because they have obvious granules in them. 2 of them are called agranulocytes. The lymphocytes and monocytes are called agranulocytes. They still have granules, it's just they're not big enough or enough of them to distinguish them as granules. So you have 3 granulocytes and 2 agranulocytes. Now, this particular granulocyte, let's start with, is the neutrophilic granulocyte. So this is going to be the one that's salmon pink in color to somebody's eyes. That is the formal name of the cell, but these are all names that are used to describe that one cell. Segs, polys, PMNs, all sorts of things can be used to describe that one cell. I just usually refer to them as segs. Segmented neutrophil, because you see the nucleus is so segmented. You have a multi-lobed nucleus connected by little chromatin threads. That little dude sitting right off the end right there, you see that little snot thing right there on the end? That little drumstick is the inactive X chromosome. So that is a female seg. Men don't have that. Is that
what's referred to as a bar body?
a
Bar body?
Bar
Inactivated
body.
X chromosome?
I don't know if is it called a bar body? I've never heard it called a bar body. Okay, yeah, that's, I've always referred to it as a drumstick. If you could Google it, bar body. Okay. The other cells don't have them, it's just the segs will have them. Okay, so here's how these things work. There is a stem cell out here somewhere that gives rise to the first recognizable white blood cell in the granulocyte series. That's called a myeloblast. Remember what I said last week about blast being more lethal than if you had a leukemia of a site. So over here we've got a myeloblast. It starts increasing in size as it develops into a promyelocyte. From the promyelocyte, it can develop into one of the 3 granulocytes. Give it another day or so, it'll take on a basophilic appearance, a neutrophilic appearance, or an eosinophilic appearance, and that's why they're called neutrophils, eosinophils, or basophils. So let's say you've got a basophilic myelocyte. The next recognizable character is a metamyelocyte, basophilic. You also have a neutrophilic and an eosinophilic metamyelocyte. They're all named the same. From right here to your left, this occurs in the marrow, and only in the marrow. This first line right here, they're called stab cells. You can also call them bands. You can find these in the peripheral circulation in low amounts. The neutrophilic band cell, normally if you look at your white blood cells and identify 100 neutrophils, 4% or so will be bands. The nucleus condenses until it forms a mature segmented neutrophil. So if you wind up with a bad infection, if you wind up with a bad infection, you need more white blood cells out there quicker. And now, we're gonna start dumping out more immature white cells. So your band count will go up. If you have a nasty infection and your band count, and you have to do a band count manually, you can't do it with a culture counter because a culture counter will call them a lymphocyte. So you can't use a culture counter. If you want a band count, you have to ask for it manually. If your band count is 9% or higher, you have a bad infection. Okay? Now you can't always use that as a measure of the severity of the infection, but it's a good indicator. You know, for a person who's immunocompromised, an elderly person who doesn't mount a good immune response, you can't use it. But in somebody your age is immunocompetent, yeah, you could use it as a measure of the severity of infection. Okay? Does that make sense? All of that makes sense? Okay, it's very easy. Did you say shit?
No, I did not.
No, okay. All right. This would be an example of a bone marrow biopsy here, where you see these embryonic or early stage cells in the bone in the biopsy sample. If you ever get a blood count on somebody and you get this in the peripheral blood, you have leukemia. That person has leukemia. And that's what happens in leukemia. You get all of these early stage cells in the periphery. Okay. This is actually probably leukemia because you don't see any of the young RBCs. I would say this is from a peripheral smear, so that would be leukemia. So you ask, you know, what would you call this leukemia? What's the youngest cell type here? A myeloblast. This would be myeloblastic leukemia. And because it's of the granulocyte series, it's myelogenious. It's myelogenious. So this is either acute myelogenous leukemia or chronic myelogenous leukemia.
Where's myelogenious?
Myelogenous means that it is a leukemia of granulocytes. Okay? The other two leukemias, common leukemias, are acute lymphocytic leukemia and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Separate cell line. But if you found a myeloblast, that's going to give rise to a granulocyte. Okay? That makes sense? Okay, well, let's take a break and then we'll come back.